Welcome to the Policy Committee meeting. I would like to call the meeting to order. Ms. King, may I have a roll call, please?
Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Here.
Peggy Mueller Aragon.
Here.
Barbara Peterson.
Here.
Crystal Tapia Romero.
Here.
Josefina Dominguez.
Here.
Courtney Jackson.
Here.
Danielle Gonzalez.
Here. For the meeting format, community members may attend the APS Board of Education meetings in person at the Alice and Bruce King Educational Complex or watch the live stream on the Board of Education YouTube channel. Our first item for consideration and action is adoption of the May 1st, 2023 Policy Committee meeting agenda and approval of the January 5th, 2023 and February 2nd, 2023 Policy Committee meeting minutes. Do I have a motion?
This is Crystal. I will make a motion to adopt the May 1st, 2023 Policy Committee meeting agenda and the approval of the January 5th, 2023 and February 2nd, 2023 Policy Committee meeting minutes.
I'll second. This is Peggy.
No one wants to say that whole thing.
Thank you. Ms. King, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Yes.
Peggy Mueller Aragon.
Yes.
Barbara Peterson.
Yes.
Crystal Tapia Romero.
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez.
Yes.
Courtney Jackson.
Yes.
Danielle Gonzalez.
Yes. Our next item for discussion is discussion on policy review and policy diet to ensure alignment with the vision and values of the APS community discussion. Parentheses discussion. We will be joined by Ashley Paz with the Council of Great City Schools. Ms. Paz, you have the floor.
Hi. Hello. APS board and superintendent Elder. I'm happy to be with you tonight to discuss the policy diet process and policy review process. I wanted to start off this evening just by opening the floor and asking any questions about the process as it pertains to the reading that you were all assigned prior to tonight's meeting.
Great, we will start there. Are there any questions in response to the reading that we were assigned for tonight? Any additional questions?
No, I think whoever submitted questions, we got questions.
I am seeing head shaking, so I think we're ready to move ahead.
Okay, great. So the policy, so in student outcomes focused governance, we have a process that is called policy diet. So this is a process that takes school boards through reviewing your board policies and looking at them through a lens of management, so dividing policy between management policies and governing policies. So in student outcomes focused governance, there are three types of policies that we encourage school boards to focus on. These are going to be your goals policy, your guardrails policies, your governing policies, and your delegating policies. So your goal policy and guardrail policy are pretty clear cut. That's your goals and your guardrails. And these are actually policy statements that define what students should know or be able to do as your district pursues its educational program, and what the values of the committee or the values of the community should be protected along the way. So those are going to be your goals and your guardrails policies. And then your governing policies are going to be the policies that are specific to how you as a board conduct business, how you operate within the district, and how your relationship to the superintendent and your administration. So those are going to be your governing policies. And then delegated policies are going to be everything that is not a governing policy, goals policy, or a guardrail policy, but is still required by law to remain on the books. Or that specifically delegates action to the superintendent and the administration. So the policy diet process takes you through your current policy book, which is quite long. It can be an intensive process, and you look through with that lens of which policies do we want to keep, which policies do we want to delete, and which policies do we want to modify. And that's kind of an overview of the policy diet process.
Great, thank you for that. So I think we just wanted to create some space here tonight to talk through what that process would look like in our context, and appreciate your answers to the questions that were sent in advance. So acknowledging that we would start with a policy review. And I know everyone read the reading and doesn't sound like they have any more questions. And so I just want to see if there is anything else we need to tackle with Ms. Paz here, or Ms. Paz, if there's anything else you want us to discuss before we move on to the next agenda item, which is the update on the board procedure manual.
Yeah, so if it was my understanding that your board may want to discuss what that might look like for Albuquerque Public Schools. My recommendation has been that over the summer, you actually can pull together an ad hoc committee. My recommendation to the president is that that committee be led by you, Board Member Gonzalez, as the policy committee chair. You are probably the most appropriate person to lead that process. And the reason that you probably wouldn't want to do it as a full board is it can take a really long time. So the actual review process can be divided, and you can actually get through it pretty efficiently if you tackle it in an ad hoc committee structure, and then bring recommendations to the board from that point. I think we currently have it scheduled to begin in June, and then for all of the final so the work of the committee to go on over the summer, and then final recommendations to be brought forward at the end of the summer, kind of towards the beginning of next school year. How you want to do it is really up to you all. That's just my recommendation for how the work be done, based on my experience of working with boards. Also, I was privileged to be the chair of a policy committee when I served on a school board and undertook this process. So I've been able to learn a lot of lessons through a hands-on approach, which can be beneficial for you all. But ultimately, you all have to be the ones to decide how you want to move forward, who will be a part of the process, and what that process will look like.
I do have one quick question. So this is Yolanda. Just one quick question. In that process with the ad hoc group, starting with board members, is it customary to also just involve some staff? So like, would Jessica, who's our policy lead for our board services office, also have a role in that, and then we'd pull in staff as we needed?
Yeah, so that's actually a great question. So my recommendation is that for all of your committees that you have some, at least one member of staff who can support the work of the committee. And this can be just through technical processes and whatnot. Now, in the policy review, there are actually three different perspectives that you want to put on policy. So there are three questions that are asked. The first question is this legally required? There's only one person who should answer that question, and that is your district's attorney. I can literally look at statute and say, well, this is probably legally required. You can too, but the attorney for the board is the one who you really should be depending on legal advice from. So that's the first person. And then there is a second question that is what is the degree to which this policy, when you answer this for every single policy in the book, corresponds to impacting student outcomes. We actually recommend that piece of the review be conducted by the superintendent and a staff that he leads. Generally, it's not literally the superintendent who is doing the work. It's usually the policy director and some combination of other people within the district that they decide on. And then the third is the question, is this policy, does it rely on more of a management expertise or more of a governance expertise? And that's the specific review that the board conducts. And there, in the questions that the answers to the questions that I provided, I actually included a link to a matrix that includes two rubrics that you may use, one for the staff question and one for the school board question, to make it easier. You, of course, don't have to use that rubric, but you're welcome to. It definitely is a lot easier to use one that's already out there, or to amend one that's already out there versus trying to make your own. And then a crosswalk instrument that allows you to it applies the scores from both of those rubrics and the answers from the attorney in helping facilitate that final conversation.
Thank you for that. And again, acknowledging that everyone has read the document. I just want to make sure that there's anything else about the process that people may have any questions about, because we do also have on our agenda for tonight special issues item C, which is actual appointment of the committee, and we could talk through all of the process-oriented stuff here before we get to that later in the agenda. And so with that, I know Member Peterson, you have a question or comment?
I do. I'm curious about the experience of boards that have done this. You know, I have no aversion to work. I have no aversion to lots of work, but I do hate busy work. And so I really would like some insight into what the boards that have taken this on, what they found in that process. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, that's actually a really great question. And it's usually the one that most people lead with. So thank you for speaking up. So most of the boards that I have either walked this through, and even my own experience on my own board, is that there is an easy way to do this and there is a difficult way to do this. The easy way to do this is to start with everything goes out. So we're going to delete everything, and if we're for anything that we keep, we need to justify a reason for keeping it. So either it's legally required or it meets the threshold that the board has identified for the level of governance expertise. So that's pretty much going to include all of your governing policies, and most of those you can generally expect to modify. So I know that there is one of the other things that you have on the agenda for tonight is to hear a report from the Board Operating Procedures Committee. And so they're going through the work of looking at the different operating procedures that you have, which are also called your B policies. And they're not necessarily going to be editing policy, but identifying here are the policies that we specifically think, or we recommend to the board to take an additional look at. So that can help get some of the heavy lifting out of the way. But then, you know, your financial policies, your your student policies, and everything that is not a governing policy or your or a delegating policy will pretty much be put into or policies that fall below that threshold of involvement that the board agrees that you want to have. Anything that goes there is going to go out. So that's going to get rid of the vast majority of the busy work and save the most robust conversations for the ones that really have the biggest impact on student outcomes.
Sort of the other global sort of question I have is that without a doubt over the years, many policies are policies that were adopted to specifically address issues that come to us from the community. And we do have a role. I mean, one of the things that's in this is saying that is part of our role, is that outward look and the place that people come to. So I'm just curious, in more of a global and not specific sense, how boards have gone about juggling that and really looking at that in a way to be reflective of the community need, culture, all of those things, and at the same time reducing the weight of the policies overall.
Yeah, so actually the most effective boards that we are currently working with and have worked with in the past have actually relegated their policies related to the community's vision and values into their goals policies and their guardrails policies. So additional policy that is selecting inputs, that is articulating what should and shouldn't happen in the district, how the district should or should not be managed. Those are the policies specifically that the policy diet is helping you get out of the way. One of the ways that we often will describe this to school boards is, you've adopted your goals and you've adopted your guardrails. There are going to be a lot of things that have been done in the past by previous boards, to no ill will, no negative connotation to their work. They were responding to the needs of the time, but now we have created a new set of priorities, and we want to focus on these priorities. So any policies that are removing the focus from those very specific priorities, they're still important, but we're going to pass them to the superintendent to decide where they will live and if they will live on from henceforth.
It will be an interesting process.
It always is.
Like many things, I think the devil will be in the details. There's lots of fun stuff when you're making sausage. So are there other questions or comments related to the process while we have Ms. Paz?
I loved your comment.
Let's make some sausage. Right. All right, let's make some sausage. Yes. All right. Thank you, Ms. Paz. We will move on to the next item on our agenda tonight, which is our next item for discussion is an update on the board procedure manual. And we have board members Josefina Dominguez and Courtney Jackson. You both have the floor.
Go ahead. You want me to go? Okay. So what board member Dominguez and I are doing is we are going through, as Ashley alluded to earlier, is we're going through the B policies. And those are the Board of Education governance and operations policies. There are 19 of them. And currently what we're working to do, what our goal is to consolidate and organize them and to make them more transparent to the public. We are trying to kind of clearly delineate what are governing policies and what are management policies. And what we're doing is we're going to use an outline from the Council of Great City Schools to kind of incorporate all of those. And I did just want to take a second to thank Johanna for going through all of the B policies and putting them into one document as best she could as to where she thought they would line up, so that it'll kind of be easier for us to go through and look at the differences there. But we're just kind of working through this. And well, do you want to talk about our procedure, how we're gonna?
Well, I think what we've discovered is that there are two. We're working in tandem with the procedural directors, which are more administrative. And so that's why it's so great to have Johanna as staff, right? Because as Courtney and I get through a board-focused portion of this. For example, today I looked at Ms. King's work, and I was struck. It's like, oh my gosh, this is all administrative work. And it's good to have it happening in tandem, because she gets to look at our work, and it's a good way to double check, right? To make sure that that it will be a seamless operation. And so that was the takeaway today, among other things. New technology not excluded, but yeah, we're just getting started, and I think questions are going to arise. They already have for me. It's fascinating that we will have our own goals and guardrails, but that the challenge is that I think I was just talking to Ms. King about this. I don't want to create more work. We need to be in alignment with the goals and guardrails that are already on the books that we've already adopted. So we're going to work hard to do that. So.
And then just to add kind of like the timeline of what we're thinking is this going to take a couple of months, and our goal is to have this document ready to go by August, so that when because we're already starting to see new people putting in to be interested to run for the board next year. And so, or I guess this year. And so we kind of want to have that document ready to go by August, so that anybody who's interested in running for the Board of Education understands kind of what the work really is. And so this document will create just very singularly what it means to govern for the Board of Education, and to create a little bit more transparency, and to kind of, to one of your notes from before, kind of take out some of the education-ese and make it a little bit more public facing and transparent. So.
Accessible. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Thank you for the update. Are there questions from other members?
I have a question. So based on what they're doing, are we now going to follow this exact sample of what Ashley gave us as they go through theirs, and as we have other committees as well in terms of the diet? Are you guys going to go through this using this manual or this template?
No.
No, theirs is different. So the template is for all of the other policies.
Other stuff.
And then as we consider any new policy, it would kind of
Got
be
it.
filtered through that.
Okay.
Yeah, our template's a little bit different. So yeah, it's basically, we're pulling out the B policies so that the ad hoc committee can do all of the others. You're welcome.
More than
More than 19.
Yeah.
But our section is pretty, I mean, it's pretty foundational. And so, yeah, I think it's going to take some deep dives.
Other questions? All right, we will move on then. Our next item for discussion is item C, appointment of an ad hoc committee to oversee policy review and diet. So I will turn it over to Board President Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
So on this one, a conversation with Ashley and just talking about the committee, and also with board member Gonzalez too, in terms of the ad hoc committee. And just a reminder that just because we set up an ad hoc committee doesn't mean we don't have a voice in the process. It's just that we have worker bees that are doing all this, and we don't have to worry about scheduling meetings and stuff, because we're not going to have a quorum of the board. And so the ad hoc committee for this, and folks are already aware who it's going to be or what we're doing. But I've asked board member Peterson and board member Tapio Romero to join board member Gonzalez on that process. And so they're the ones that will take the deep dive, working with Ashley as they're going through that entire rubric. And then we'll be reporting back to the board on progress as they move along. So this work will be taking place over the summer. It'll begin in June with the goal to have final recommendations by the beginning of the school year. And we will have staff support from Johanna and Jessica. And I think we're going to figure a lot of it out as we go. So acknowledging there's lots of questions we probably don't have answers to, I will ask. Are there other questions about this, specifically being the appointment of the ad hoc committee to oversee the policy review?
I think it's fantastic.
I do believe the questions that we need to ask have not been created yet. And that's going to be a huge part of the process, is that this is an immense task. And so it will be interesting. There will be questions. I don't think we even know what they are yet.
Yeah.
So I am willing to engage in that.
And so I think perhaps after we adjourn tonight, the three of us can get together and look at calendars and figure out some times that we can propose to Ms. Paz to maybe have a first conversation. All right. Anything else on the ad hoc committee? Great. So our next item for discussion is item D, discussion on developing a budget policy. And we had in our packets a model policy with a big watermark on it that said sample. And so this is really just for discussion only. It's a model policy just to get your juices flowing about what our policy could look like. So the goal for tonight is just to have a facilitated conversation around what we would like to see in a policy on budget and finance, so that Ms. Martinez can collect all of that feedback, comments, and go and work along with Ms. Apodaca and the finance team, as well as anyone else who needs to be engaged in the process to put together a new budget policy. And we will follow the existing policy development trajectory calendar. So this is just preliminary discussion, sort of the discussion before we have a first read. So it'll be this first discussion, development of a draft policy, then the first reading, and then feedback, and then the final reading and vote for approval, and then it goes to full board for approval as well once it passes the policy committee. So we're very much just on the front end. I just wanted to remind folks, we're not editing the policy that's in here. I know the dates that are in there don't make sense for what we are doing, so ignore those dates. We're not going to make specific changes there. We're also not going to say how the finance team needs to do their work. We're not going to get into the weeds of that. But really important for us to think about, each one of us as individual board members, what do we need to effectively execute our role as a board member when it comes to managing the budget, which is one of the most significant pieces of our role as board members. So if you looked at the policy, which I know y'all did, there's sort of three big chunks in that model policy there. The first is sort of about process. And we've been talking a lot about process, and we have been in our finance committees monthly getting the update with this PowerPoint. And we know we have the little chart in here that shows that the process goes year round. So we're not talking about the process that the team does. We're not going to get into their work. We're going to talk about the process for us in terms of this calendar, and acknowledging, again, we've already made some changes. So we're already getting the monthly update in the finance committee meeting. Maybe we just want to systematize that in our policy. That's one thing, but we could talk about process. The second big chunk of that model policy was reporting. So what are the reporting documents? What's the cadence of reporting? What's the degree of transparency, again, that we need to be able to do our work to serve as board members? And then, as you see, there's a section in there on reserve, so that we could certainly address that as well, or anything else. And so for the purpose of our conversation, just want to encourage everyone to take into consideration everything that we've learned so far through SOFG, everything that we've learned from Edunomics sessions, everything we learned from the board and budget document that we reviewed a couple of weeks ago, everything that we've learned from NMSBA and MASBO, those sessions as well as our experience. And there are many members on this board who've had a lot of experience, not just on this board, but in other boards as well. So taking all of that into consideration, if you can think through three questions, so we're going to go through each question individually. So the first is, what do you like about this model policy? What in here is something, a concept, a framework that you think you'd like to see us adapt or bring into our policy on budget? So we'll have some conversation about that. The second is, what's missing? And again, really thinking about what you need to help you do your role to really understand the alignment of budget to goals and guardrails, to really understand the role of the budget relative to this district. But what's missing from this policy? What else would you like to see added? I think particularly in the financial reporting section, which is right now just kind of a litany of things that could be listed. There may be other things. And then any other feedback that you have. And so I'll just also acknowledge that this same conversation is happening with Ms. Apodaca and her team. What do they need the board to do to hold them accountable, to manage the policy, et cetera, as well? So with that, the questions are, again, what do you like about this model policy? What's missing from it? And then other feedback that you have. So we'll go first, coming from my right down on the what do you like about it, and then we'll switch on the what's missing about it and go the other way. So we will start with member Muller-Aragon on the what do you like about this model policy?
I mean, what I saw that I liked, honest, was the reporting part of it, that it was just really detailed. So that's really what I did truly like about it. So that's simple.
Thank you.
Right?
Member
Pretty
Jackson.
simple.
Yeah, I think what really stood out to me when I was reading it was under the financial reports. Specifically, I really liked the per pupil expenditures and all of that. I really liked that. And then the section, the very clear section about school site-based budgeting. I think that sends a very strong signal to our community, to our schools, that we really are shifting how business is done. So I really liked that section, and I really liked the specificity of the reporting.
Thank you. Member Tapia Romero?
Yeah, I think obviously in relation of keeping our focus that this is strictly about budgets and trying to remove other variables out of it. I'd like the part almost ditto to what Board Member Jackson said about the per pupil, and also knowing about the site-based budgeting, of knowing exactly how a school is looking month to month and then throughout the year. Because if we have to make decisions long-term when we're talking about consolidating sites or whatever the case may be, we have this data in front of us already to know how a school is performing and what resources it's needing.
Great, thank you. President Montoya Cordova?
I think as I was looking through it, I was just, the reports, I agree. Those are really helpful. But I was just thinking about, there are times when they are reporting revenues and expenditures year to date. We do see those pieces. So I think for me, it's nice that it's all just it's stated clearly about where we are. I think we have a lot of these pieces already. It's just putting it in a policy. In terms of the per pupil expenses, and this is just my experience, is that I think that one can get really tricky, because I think there's a whole lot of other variances that can get in there. So I just want to be really cautious about, sort of caution us on that too, because sometimes it's not as clear as it appears to be. I think it can get really tricky there. So we do have on our, the SAPR does a really good job of sort of outlining those things for us. And I think it's just also being able to use this policy to direct our public where they can also find that information, because I think SAPR does a really good job of helping us to coordinate that. So I think that's and of course I probably jumped to what's missing, but I appreciate, just everything that's in it. I will say that I know from the public, there's always a lot of concern around the general fund balance reserve and what that looks like. Being able to just put some more transparency around that in terms of how it's utilized and what it actually looks like isn't a bad thing. So I liked that as well, that it does cover and addresses that as well. It's an important reserve for us. We definitely have enormous costs on a per month basis. And so having that reserve is really critical. That's it for me.
Thank you. Member Peterson?
I like having written down in policy some of the criteria for community input. I think it's something that we've strived to do. I think it's good to have it written down. I think the school-based budgeting, site-based budgeting, in fact, is really minimally different from what's been in practice for a long time. But I think having it written down and clarified is always a good thing, because when it's not, there's always a level of distrust around the process, even if that process has been standard operating procedure. So I think clarifying some of the things that we have been doing and specificity is always good.
Thank you. Member Dominguez?
Well, schools, site-based budgeting also caught my eye. I guess I want to know how site-based budgeting now is different from the 1990s, when I was aware of it. And I think it's important to know how it's different so that we can if at all, but I'm sure there've been some tweaks in order to know next step, right? Because again, there's this historical continuum. Nothing happens in a vacuum. And so it'd be helpful to know, yeah, what are the differences? And given our goals, how will that impact the next steps? And I would argue that this is helpful for the public to know as well. And I would apply the same thing to the other categories.
Great, thank you. Superintendent Elder, anything you wanted to add in around what you like about the model policy?
Well, what I read, it definitely gives us some pretty clear guidance on what we're supposed to be reporting and what you're looking for. Well, so that's what I like, is the clear guidance and the clear expectation of what it is. And I like that you keep saying you're going to work with the budget department, so.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
I also like that we talked about the difference between what's happening at the school site versus central office. Because many times we've heard people tell us what the heck's going on over there. We're too top heavy. And now we have a clear distinction of being able to justify the spending.
All right, and we're going to go the opposite direct. And so I agree. I mean, I also had the financial transparency was sort of the top thing that I liked, all of the reporting. So just hope that we can integrate that into our policy. So we're going to go the other direction. We'll start with first member Dominguez on what's missing or what else do you need as a board member to help you effectively execute your role as someone who has fiduciary responsibility.
Well, I'll keep it simple. I want to know history here. How are things different now than they were back when we were site-based budgeting in the 1990s?
So is that something you think needs to be in the policy, or
I
that's
think-
a reading individual learning goal that you would be interested in?
No, I think, again, I think the public needs to know this. I mean, that's been something that I have, as perhaps it's the teacher in me, but when I go out to talk to people and they bring up budget concerns, I give them a history lesson. And I give them a lesson about where we get our money, right? And how much comes from the state, et cetera. So I'm approaching this in the same manner.
And so in terms of the policy, maybe links to explanations of the SEG and some broader history on New Mexico education finance or something like that, for which we've had those readings in the past. There's a couple of different things that exist. So maybe being mindful about the links that are included to this in this.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Member Peterson?
So is there a third question before I launch in on what's missing?
The third was any other feedback,
Okay.
and which they could be on sort of this whole process that we're embarking on, or
Okay, so yeah, I have several things, and this is echoing in part board member Montoya Cordova's concern that the items of per pupil expenditure by school, per pupil expenditures by school compared to student growth, what those things really and truly mean, and how we actually shed light on that rather than confusing, dividing, disorienting. And I think some good examples are Mark Twain with an incredibly huge, very high needs special ed population. If we just put out that Mark Twain has this much money per student and here's the student growth, it leads to a lot of confusion. Same thing with schools with high numbers of language learners, schools with high numbers of refugees, and what that means. context really does mean something. And if we don't add the context, it leads to really bad conclusions. I mean, it's something that even on SAFR, I wish that we could really figure out how to illuminate programs in the strengths of schools and not just have it go straight to test scores and demographics, because we, in many cases, we're talking apples and oranges. And when it comes to school expenditures, we just have to take that into account. A lot of that, I think, is what falls to the administration. I mean, it's probably not something that we as a board directly oversee, thinking about our policy diet, but it's something that we have to clarify for how it's addressed so that people don't feel blindsided or misinformed. There are a couple of other things that caught my eye under the general fund balance reserve. Absolutely no dispute about the importance. I do have a question. If we say the district shall always maintain no less than 15% of annual local tax revenues in the general fund, I don't believe there's hardly anything that we raise locally that's part of our general operational budget.
Yeah, so these are totally just from a different
So,
place. But so if we
yeah.
want to have a component of our budget policy that mentions the reserve and puts in place a description of when it's used, like I think it would be pretty high level, not this from some other district
Mhm.
or state. I don't know where this is from.
And the only other thing is we are highly constrained by the timing of the legislature, and that we also do have an obligation. We do have a collective bargaining agreement, and that collective bargaining agreement, whether we are fully in support of it or whether we have serious issues with it, does have a budgetary impact. And that is by state collective bargaining law. And so I'm not sure how we want that to be reflected in policy. It has no direct impact because that again is an administrative feature, not a board governing feature. But I don't know if we want to add something of a tip of the hat that sometimes our best intentions with budget have constraints based on other factors and how we want a policy to reflect that.
Anything else?
That's it for now.
All right.
I suspect we'll have more opportunities.
We will for sure. And this is really just trying to capture all of the feedback, and then Jessica's going to work some magic. Member Monterey Cordova.
Sure. So I think for me, what I really want to be able to describe in this policy as well is that it's not just an annual budget, but it's a continuous budget. And so somehow reflecting, I love the wheel because it sort of gives us that perspective of everything that's going on for a district just in terms of budgeting. So yes, we do approve a budget each year, but we're adjusting our budget as we're going along. So I really want it to reflect that and sort of maybe start out with this like sort of a brief that, I mean, I like the wheel for that reason, because it sort of tells us, and I think it's a good because I think some community members might want to come in at different points of time, depending on where we are in that cycle. The other thing is that we do need to be reflective of how our budget gets impacted every other year, depending on what legislative cycle it is, because New Mexico is really unique to that. I mean, I worked in a state where we got 24-month budget cycles, and in New Mexico, we get a 12-month budget cycle, but we're also getting 12-month budget cycles either in as early as February or all the way into, to April. So I think our community needs to understand that, and maybe somehow just putting some pieces of education in that, because it's going to impact our timing for us. And Barbara's absolutely correct. The timing on that with regard to like negotiations will be impacted by everything that we do. So, I mean, I think that's the only thing for me that's really missing is just making sure that we're letting the public know how a budget gets, how the budget is, that it's not, we're not building something. And I think also straight out of the chute, just saying that the majority of our budget is for personnel. I mean, I think we just have to say that. We have to straight up say that. It's like 90% of this budget is for personnel. And so we just need to be able to straight up say that as well.
Thank you. Member Tapia Romero?
The only thing that came to mind, and I am completely flexible with this, it's not something that has to be, but maybe a comparison to what other districts our size, what their budgets look like. Because I think many times people see our dollar amount and they think like, oh my gosh, they don't need more money. But when we're inside and we're seeing what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, we're always advocating for more funding. And to see how we compare to other districts our size, similar demographics. Because knowing that we're like one of these, I think the second largest employer in the state, to see how we compare with other districts throughout the country. So.
Do we have other districts that have Native American, Hispanic, ELLs, to the degree that we do? I don't know.
Well, it's a suggestion that we can take into consideration.
No,
to figure out how we
absolutely.
can integrate
But
it. Yeah.
But and just going back, I mean, it's like also being able to state that the majority of the budget that comes to us is very categorical. They've already determined where that money is going to be spent. We just have to apply it.
Right. Well, and I think just part of it is there's explanation of budget and how it works, and then there's policy on budget. And so I think we just have to, we can link to other documents and explain things, but also just thinking through, it's important to name all the external factors that influence how the calendar works or how the decisions are made or whatever. And given those limitations or external factors, what is the vision statement for the district that is important to this board and community as we develop the budget? Member Jackson.
The only thing that I will add specifically about this policy is what's missing is just to me succinctness. This one that we're looking at is long and wordy. So it, just sticking with my assignment, this is succinctness, but I will have other feedback when we come back down the road.
Great, thank you. Member Muller-Aragon.
And I, for that, what Member Jackson said is it's so long and there are no definitions for certain things. So I don't know how I could interpret it would be different. And I'll just give you a few examples. There are other ones. What does actual financial performance? How's that defined? How is a school leader defined? How is a district financial administrator defined? How is student growth? Is it academic growth? Is it enrollment? So those kinds of definitions, I don't know. I interpret them different than you might interpret them. And so I think that with it being so long, we're just going to have to, we're going to have to make some changes on taking some of the wording out or make definitions. And then as somebody else already said, is trying to put some links to link to some of our statute, like, 22-5-4. And I know this is from another district and it says that, you can make desired changes, but is that really implicit in the language of 22-5-4 when we're just supposed to review and approve? I mean, there's all those kinds of little things that I see that could be, that could be missing. But I mean, I have a whole lot of other stuff, but I think as we go through it, we'll figure it out.
Okay. And as Ms. Martinez takes her first stab at the new version, so just acknowledging this was only to get our juices flowing. We're not even going to start with this and edit it. It's just sort of what are potential things. So is there anything else when you say you have other ideas that you think is important to have in this first draft?
In the first draft. I think somebody already said this. I don't know if Member Peterson, when she was going through on the second to the last page, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I mean, that is just, I think that's just a tough one. I think that's just going to be really a difficult thing to do. And then this may be another thing is when it's kind of defining, access, we're not really defining what is the training that we may need or administrators may need, yet we're expecting certain tasks from them, like one of them, the superintendent having to establish a district differentiated funding formula. I mean,
But we're not requesting that. That's just in here. So,
Just a sample.
pull it out.
yeah. Okay, so that's,
I mean, those kinds of things that need to kind of get taken out or re-looked at. And I think that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 need to just maybe be really looked at again.
the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, is that the,
Yeah, in addition to these, the board will have access to the following management reports. And I know maybe ours might look different, right? It probably wouldn't be these 6. So trying to figure out, and I think that would be up to, Jessica to kind of look at what would really pertain to
yeah.
Albuquerque.
Well, and I think to Ms. Apodaca too, because these are pulled from Economics here, which is why number 6 is says anything else that Economics recommends. So yes. Great. So from my perspective, I feel like what's missing is a clear purpose statement at the beginning. I think it is true that a budget is a statement of values, and I think we need to have at least one sentence at the beginning that sort of establishes that and the importance of this document. The second is we talked the other night about forecasts and how helpful multiple year forecasts are. So I think integrating that as well. And I know there's lots of different factors there given the uncertainty around the budgeting, but figuring out what type of forecasts our finance team thinks are reasonable or possible. And this is from a district that doesn't have SOFG goals and guardrails. And so there is a statement in here around the budget, I can't where it's at, but the budget needs to align to the strategic plan and the goals. So I think for our purpose, we do need just to tighten a little bit around the relationship between the budget and the goals and guardrails, which again is work that we know is already ongoing, but again, sort of getting that into policy. All right, so I'm just going to open the floor for the third question, which is like any feedback, anything else, anything we haven't talked about yet, anything important to you as you think about the development of a new budget policy moving forward. Member Jackson.
So my other feedback was the purpose of us creating a policy for budget is because it's a statement of our values, right? Like what you just said, but also we're in student outcomes focused governance where we are going to be monitoring. And so what I really kind of liked about like the 1 through 6 with the per pupil expenditures and all of that is that it kind of helps us to answer those questions that we need to be answering during monitoring. The who, the what, the why, the how. And I'm totally cheating right now, but I have my student focused governance manual pulled up on page 20. And some of those questions that we need answered could be answered through, implementation of a policy that already gives us the answers to those questions. Like who is struggling the most? By having a per pupil or seeing that we have a big expense over here and yet low test score or low student outcomes. Well, why are they struggling? I think having some of that information allows us to answer the who. It allows us to answer what worked and what didn't work. So my other feedback is I really like having statements like that in the budget policy because it ties back to the monitoring that we are going to do and helps us to better shift and drive the momentum of the district towards student outcomes if the policy and the governance structure is aligned.
Thank you.
That's my feedback.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, Member Tapia-Romero.
So the only thing that comes to mind is in relation to this, it just reminds me of stuff I've done previous, and I'll just give you the terms that we've used before is plan, do, review. If we planning out the budget, we actually implement it. At what point do we ever go back to see, did it work that we actually put funding towards this program? towards, this particular resource, school, employee, whatever the case may be, to know if we got the outcome that we really expected to see. So just a review process of how we're spending our money.
Thank you. Any other comments? I'll do Member Peterson and then I'm Superintendent Elder.
I think it would be really good to have, not in policy, but this is something that's sort of risen up through this conversation about really helping the community understand budget and things like, it's real hard to compare district to district, even though I think it's a valuable thing to do, but it's tricky because we rely so heavily on state funding that lots of times people will compare New Mexico to another state where perhaps only half of their budget for schools comes from the state. So when you compare what's the state funding, it looks completely different from one state to another because there are local revenues that are raised. So it sort of goes into a whole, I think it's important, but it goes into a whole more global information packet. And if we could figure out a way to really clearly, succinctly, and in an accessible way, explain what the budget process is for us, the relationship with the state, the relationship with local funding, all of those things, and to do it in a format that's not totally overwhelming is a challenge for communications, but something that we should probably take on, because I think that it really does illuminate where we are. The other thing, and this is the pie in the sky. This is the kind of thing that we got slapped on the hand by Charles Sallee for. But if we were really doing site-based budgeting, we would start at the school level for what the need is and then figure out how to fund it. But that's not how we're able to fund schools, because that's not how we receive our funding. But I think there again, it's important to help people understand that fact.
Where the gap is.
Where are the gaps? And since we're doing our guardrails, that what we lead with is that the superintendent will not allow resources to be distributed inequitably. And that's what the need base always comes back to.
Thank you.
I was just going to add that kind of flew out of my head a little bit here. Let me think. Wait, go back to the superintendent. You were going to go to him first. And let me get my thought together because I did have it. All of a sudden it just went. Oh,
It's going to be a quick comment, Board
okay.
President, so you better get ready.
Okay, I am.
What's been interesting to me is we saw the sample policy just, late last week, and we kind of read it, and there was definitely some reactions to it. And so I was sort of sent here tonight with, if you can. So it's interesting that almost all the elements that we picked up as areas of concern, you guys have sort of pointed out and said, we're worried about this, we're worried about this, we're worried about that. So I just want to, like I said, I like the concept that you guys are saying we will work with Ms. Apodaca and the budget team. That absolutely has to happen, because there's certain things in the sample plan that really just logistically and doesn't work for us. And like you said, this is not from here. And they've been through the Edunomics training. This is nothing that they hadn't heard of or seen before. And I also like the fact that it says by a certain year. We're not saying in the next 10 minutes that we have to do this. So there were elements of that. Just remember, none of that is in the strategic plan. So although there is an element of the shift to school-based budgeting is in that plan. So those would be the areas I'd just like to highlight from the administration side.
Yeah, okay. But I think integrating that and then also some of the broader work with ERS and just that whole time frame, figuring out how we can mesh all of this.
And I think it will tie in really neatly with that work with ERS. And so that's all I want to say, just make sure that happens. Yes.
So my comment was going to be around that help, because I know I've had to do this many times with the public, because One is they just see that big old giant budget, but there's a huge component of it that's tied to capital. And capital's raised in a completely different way and it's utilized. I mean, it doesn't really get factored in as a per pupil count for that particular, for all the schools, because it's only factored in for those places where we're actually going to spend it. And it's only for that period of time, because once the expenditure is made, expenditure's gone. So there isn't a factor that's going to have for every year past that. So I think we just need to be really, you know, when we talk about capital money, that we need to think about first, we're raising it, and, you know, what we go out to try to raise and what we actually raise, because there's also a discrepancy there. But when there's an increase of a per pupil cost at a particular school, it might be because we actually had an infusion of capital money and we were spending it, but it's not going to be the actual per pupil cost moving forward, because once that expenditure is done, it's made. And it's not going to be a new, but it's not going to have added budget for the next year. So that always confuses, I know, a lot of the public, because they'll see that and they think that we're just, you know, sitting on some money, because they understand that we don't have it each year.
And then, Madam Chair, I just will go through these really quickly, is as Member Tapia Romero had said, should accountability be included in here? I think somehow that it probably should be, that we need to just make sure and look at, you know, we might be asking a lot. I know this might change somewhat. What is the cost going to be to carry out this policy? Because there's always a cost. Do we have the staff to be able to do everything that's being asked of them? So we need to make sure we have the staff to do it and the money to pay for that. So I think that's important. And then somebody already said this, make sure that this is all aligned with our goals and guardrails. And then just because the school board is going to have access to whatever reports we decide, financial reports, doesn't mean that we may have the understanding. So we need the training to really understand how to read whatever kind of reports, because they could give me a report and I don't know what the heck it means. So I think that just because you have access, I don't want access if I don't know what I'm looking at. So those are mine.
Thank you. So Ms. Martinez, want to see if there's anything from your perspective, any follow-up or clarifying questions that you have, or if you have enough to move on and work your magic.
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Elder, I believe I have enough to get started, but I will reach out if I do.
Great. Thank you. And thank you everyone for that discussion, which I hope helps us start high level and then get into more details as we go further into the process. And so with that, I will announce the next policy committee meeting, which is Monday, June 5th at 5 p.m. in the John Milne Community Boardroom of the Allison Bruce King Educational Complex. The committee is scheduled to review the APS Handbook for Student Success for 2023 and 2024 during that policy committee meeting, which is June 5th. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.
Okay. Now, welcome to the Board of Education Special Board Meeting. I would like to call this meeting to order. So Ms. King, may I have a roll call, please?
Peggy Mueller Aragon,
Here.
Danielle Gonzalez,
Here.
Barbara Peterson,
Here.
Crystal Tapia Romero,
Here.
Josefina Dominguez,
Here.
Courtney Jackson,
Here.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Here. So our first item for consideration and action is adoption of the May 1st, 2023 Special Board of Education meeting agenda. I need a motion.
I make a motion to adopt the May 1st, 2023 Special Board of Education meeting agenda.
I will second. This is Danielle.
All right. So our next item.
You need a
Hang on. Oh, we need a roll call. I'm sorry. I'm going to go just run by. Roll call, please.
Peggy Mueller Aragon.
Yes.
Danielle Gonzalez,
Yes.
Barbara Peterson,
Yes.
Crystal Tapia Romero,
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez.
Yes.
Courtney Jackson.
Yes.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Yes. So our next item is consideration for approval to adjourn to executive session pursuant to the Open Meetings Act, NMSA 1978, Section 1015-1, H7, for the purpose of discussing matters pertaining to threatened litigation and attorney-client privilege related to the cancellation of the 2022-23 Fleet Services Agreement by Sanchez Southwest Limited. May I have a motion, please?
I move that we adjourn to executive session pursuant to the Open Meetings Act, NMSA 1978, 10-15-1, H7 for the purpose of discussing matters pertaining to threatened litigation and attorney-client privilege related to the cancellation of 2022-23 Fleet Services Agreement by Sanchez Southwest.
Yes, Mia. I second. I'm Josefina Dominguez.
We have a roll call vote, please.
Patty Mueller Aragon.
Yes.
Danielle Gonzalez.
Yes.
Barbara Peterson.
Yes.
Crystal Tapia Romero.
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez.
Yes.
Brittany Jackson.
Yes.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Yes. All right, so we'll just wait to make sure we